Greetings. This talk is on Obamacare, a sick law that's wrong for America. Or to paraphrase Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me Obamacare. What could be simpler, ladies and gentlemen? The so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. 2,409 pages. For comparison, Medicare and Medicaid 136 pages, the U.S. Constitution 11 pages, the Ten Commandments 1 page. You get the impression the shorter the bill, the better. The longer the law, the worse it is. Passed 3/21/10, signed 2 days later. There was no hurry, was there? Here's another way of looking at Obamacare. The Blob. This was a cartoon that came out around the time of the bill's debate. There's Nancy Pelosi stuck to the front of it as it oozes out the Capitol dome. Here are a couple of senators running away from it, already worried about their re-election. And here's another way of looking at Obamacare. This was a chart published by one of the congressional offices around the time of the bill's debate. It's been estimated the statute Obamacare creates approximately 160 new federal agencies, with the Secretary of Health and Human Services at the center of this. Imagine the power she has now. And look at all these beautiful federal agencies it creates. Well, is this about health care? I don't think so. One of the goals of this bill is to centralize and expand federal power. Another one, to spread responsibility and blame. If you don't like what's happening over here, for example, they'll send you to this window down here. If you don't like that, that window will be closed and they'll send you over here, and so on and so forth. Imagine trying to get some health care in this system. Just imagine what it's going to be like. Another goal is to maximize government employment. Look at all these beautiful agencies. And finally, another goal is to minimize patient choice. Here's a picture around the time the bill was passed, right after it was passed. There's Nancy Pelosi with her ridiculous 4-foot gavel and all the other folks that had something to do with this bill. When I see this picture, I'm reminded of that line from the Declaration of Independence. King George has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. There's Nancy again. We have to pass the bill, so you'll find out what's in it. It's doubtful that any legislator who voted for it read the whole thing. It's doubtful that the Supreme Court justices read it when they passed judgment on it. It's doubtful that anyone could understand it, even if they read it. Just look at this stuff here. The requirements of sections 2711, other than subsections C and E, and 2712, blah, 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 blah. It would take an army of lawyers to figure this out. It probably took an army of lawyers to write it. The whole purpose of this bill, we were told at the time, was to cover the uninsured. I can come up with a one-sentence bill to cover the uninsured. All bad medical debt uncollected after 1 year shall be deductible at prevailing Medicaid rate against gross provider receipts for federal income tax calculation. Providers treating uninsured people could automatically take a deduction for that care and thereby indirectly receive payment in the simplest possible fashion without having to resort to a 2,409-page bill. Well, to really understand what's going on here in America with this bill, I think it's important to go back in history to understand the larger struggle that's going on. And I'd like to trace things back to John Locke, a British physician, interestingly enough, born 1632, died 1704. He wrote one of the best books ever written on liberty, the Second Treatise on Civil Government, in 1689. This is not a long book. It actually can be downloaded for free on your Kindle if you have a Kindle, and you can probably read it in an evening. But Locke made the point that property is a natural right of individuals and precedes government. In other words, everyone has a natural God-given right to defend his life, health, liberty, or possessions. One of the wonderful things about the second treatise is when you read it, you scratch your head a little bit and you say to yourself, gee, this sounds familiar. I think I've read this somewhere before. And sure enough, you have read it or ideas from it in the Declaration of Independence. The idea that government should protect property for individuals was central to the thinking of the American founders. So I like to say that John Locke was the original founding father and Tea Partier. So this larger context, this struggle that's going on in America over Obamacare, really is a struggle between two radically different philosophies. There's John Locke at one end of the spectrum and Karl Marx at the other. John Locke said, the reason why men enter into society is the preservation of their property or capital. His philosophy was individual-centered. His idea of good government was that the citizens are masters. And this idea, or these ideas from John Locke, are actually the newest ideas in political philosophy because they're quite unique. The older idea is that government is all powerful and that government naturally tends to tyranny. John Locke's idea is the new order of the ages, the novus ordo seclorum, that tends to limit government and prevent tyranny. By contrast, we have Karl Marx over here on the right. Capital property is reckless of the health or length of life of the laborer unless under compulsion from society. So Karl Marx's vision is government-centered. Government is master. It's an idea as old as Plato, although in slightly different form. The idea of building a government-centered utopia in which the individual is basically squeezed, crushed, and molded to conform to the government. Here's another representative contrast between John Locke and his diametrical opposite, Karl Marx. John Locke says, government has no other end but the preservation of property. Karl Marx says, the theory of communism may be summed up in one sentence: abolish all private property.